Good afternoon. On behalf of the Arthur V. Mauro Institute for Peace and Justice, I welcome each and every one of you to the 2024 Sol Kanee Lecture. My name is Dr. Stanley Amaladas, and I'm the director for the Arthur V. Mauro Institute for Peace and Justice. You know, I chuckle to myself when I introduce myself as Stanley, because that's the name that's reserved for my mom, who would scream at me, "Stanley," whenever she's upset with me. So please, call me Stan unless you're really upset with me. Before proceeding, allow me to acknowledge the land upon which we dwell at the University of Manitoba. The University of Manitoba campuses are located on original lands of Anishinaabe, Ininiwak, Anis Ininiwak, Dakota Ayote, and Dene, and on the national homeland of the Red River Métis. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with our Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. The president of our university, Dr. Benarok, regrets that he cannot be here this afternoon because he's at the Bannatyne campus for the convocation. However, he asked me to share a few words with you. He wishes me to extend, and I quote, "our university's gratitude to James Urdang for delivering what is sure to be a rousing and informative lecture at this pivotal moment in history." The nonprofit Mr. Urdang created and the University of Manitoba both strive to have education serve as a means and driver of reconciliation. End of quote. And President Benarok further continued to say, quote, that he is confident the big ideas we hear today from Mr. Urdang will help us on our own journey towards this goal. Finally, Mr. Benarok thanks the Arthur Mauro Institute for Peace and Justice for hosting today's lecture with the support of the Richardson Foundation. And finally, he wishes all an enjoyable and reflective day. I believe it's going to be reflective, but I'll leave Mr. Urdang to make it enjoyable. I would like at this point to invite Dr. Dilantha Fernando to bring greetings from St. Paul's College.
Thank you, Stanley. Good afternoon. My name is Dilantha Fernando, Dean of Studies at St. Paul's College and a professor in the Faculty of Agricultural and Food Sciences at the University of Manitoba. It is my great pleasure to bring greetings to all of you, and especially to our distinguished Sol Kanee speaker, Mr. James Urdang. On behalf of St. Paul's College Assembly, staff, students, and our rector, Dr. Chris Adams, who cannot be here today. More than 20 years ago, the Mauro Institute arose from the vision of the late Dr. Arthur Mauro, an alumnus of St. Paul's College and the University of Manitoba. Dr. Mauro's vision of promoting peace and justice created the Sol Kanee Lecture Series, allowing the University of Manitoba to bring renowned speakers from around the world, including Nobel laureates. This year, we are fortunate to have Mr. James Urdang, CEO and founder of Education Africa, as our distinguished Sol Kanee speaker. Now, I'm pleased to invite Professor Adam Muller, Professor of Peace and Conflict Studies, to introduce our distinguished speaker. Dr. Muller.
Thanks very much, Dilantha. Thank you, Stan. A special thank you also to the Morrow Institute's manager, Jason Brennan, for all his hard work with assisting with the organization of this event and also with its promotion. Thanks to all of you very much, and all of you who've shown up here today as well. Thank you. It's my great honor to introduce our 2024 Kanee lecturer, James Urdang. I first met James in South Africa in December of 2022, when I was taken on an excursion by the organizer of the conference that I was in the country to attend. I knew very little about this trip, except that we were supposed to visit a school in a black township known as Orange Farm that is located a moderate distance outside of Johannesburg. The school ended up being Masebambani College, about which I know James will have more to say later. And James ended up being our tour guide. It's difficult for me to properly express how moved I was encountering the work being done for and by poor black South African students at Masebambani College. The school itself is extraordinarily beautiful, and is an extraordinarily beautiful and well-equipped institution located in the heart of Orange Farm, a relatively new township created in the late 1980s by recently laid off black farm workers seeking a place to call home. The township is now one of South Africa's largest informal settlements, with a population of more than 1 million people. As it has expanded over the years, its infrastructural needs have grown and services have been added, all at a cost that is increasingly difficult for already impoverished residents to bear. More than a third of those living in Orange Farm are unemployed, and crime, disease, and illiteracy are ubiquitous. It's against this backdrop of economic precarity and existential vulnerability that the achievement that is Masebambani College comes into focus. In partnership with the city of Vienna, building began on the college's primary school in 1996. The official opening of the high school took place in March 2010, thanks to a wider partnership with Canada's Cedar Foundation. 2013 saw the first class of Masebambani to matriculate with a 100% pass rate. These are national exams. And by 2019, in addition to another 100% pass rate, 69% of the school's graduates qualified for university entrance, while amassing 58 academic distinctions between them. This is an extraordinary record of achievement, which speaks loudly and clearly for education's power to enrich and transform lives. Masebambani's college's success resulted from the sustained efforts of the NGO Education Africa, which James Urdang founded in 1992. James established Education Africa following a sustained period of anti-apartheid activism that he undertook under the mentorship of ANC stalwart Walter Sisulu, one of Nelson Mandela's great friends and advisors. Working closely with Mandela, James helped to develop the No Easy Walk to Freedom video, 2 series of Nelson Mandela presidential medallions, as well as the Presidential and Premier Education Awards, which Education Africa hosted over a period of several years, and which Nelson Mandela personally attended while holding office. Over the course of his distinguished career, James Urdang has received many awards and citations for his education work, including a Swiss International 2018 Klaus J. Jacobs Award honoring social innovation and change-making in the field of child and youth development. His archive of personal materials relating to Nelson Mandela was recently gifted to the Mandela Foundation Archives, thereby officially becoming a part of South African history. James has led a rich, impactful life that has made a profound difference to the past, present, and future of impoverished Black South Africans. Indeed, for all South Africans. I consider it a privilege to know James and to welcome him to speak with us here at the University of Manitoba today on the subject of education delivery through social cohesion, more than 3 decades of making real change happen. Welcome, James.
Good afternoon. It's working. Good, good. I must say, South Africans will say, how's it? Now, how's it is, hello, how are you? And it's done. And some will say, fine. Some things that South Africans are also famous of doing is, if we're going to say yes to something, we actually say no. So I'll say, no, yes, I will do that now. Don't worry. No, we'll do it. So if I say no today, don't get confused, because I won't be. So I was born in 1964. I grew up through the apartheid era. And I had my own challenges to deal with as well growing up. Most of you know that South Africa went through about 300 years of colonialism, which damage we still suffer today. But it was put on paper in 1948 through the election of the Nationalist Party under the banner of apartheid. I went to your museum on Tuesday and I learnt about your residential schools. And I thought we got similar past histories and we can learn from each other, and something that we mustn't shy away from, because we've got to learn from history to not repeat history. In 1955 in South Africa, the black parties, colored parties, the Rainbow Nation, as you would call it, with some of the white parties got together in Kliptown, which is known today as the Walter Sisulu Square, and came up with a constitution for South Africa called the Freedom Charter. That is back in 1955. And what was so important about the Freedom Charter was it was a constitution for all. It was about a free and democratic government where citizens will be equal. So never once was there anything about trying to push whites out of South Africa or other race groups or separate. The goal for fighting for freedom and our democracy was enshrined in the Freedom Charter, which today our Constitution was built off. And I think that's so important, because even though we are told otherwise, there was never that threat. And I believe that was possible, that we went through our transformation to democracy, even though it was so difficult through those times and so violent, that we knew that South Africa was for all who live in it. My journey with Education Africa started with meeting Walter Sisulu. Walter, we've had a little bit of introduction from Adam, was actually the mentor to Nelson Mandela. I met Walter in 1991. I remember going to his office onto the 10th floor of the African National Congress, which was housed at a building called Shell House. And the leadership was on the 10th floor. And James, in his mid-20s, off I went. And I went to go meet Walter. I came out the lifts. If you turned left, was Nelson Mandela's office. You turned right, was Tata Sisulu. And why I say Tata, his father. It's known as father. So I went to Tata Sisulu. Little did I know if I went left, which I was going to eventually go, was going to change my life forever. I went to go meet Walter, a Robben Island prisoner. And he was kind and gentle. And I was wondering, how could people be so cruel to this elderly man, locking him up on the island? And I always like to describe Walter, to put in perspective for you. The two of us were going to an event where Nelson Mandela had invited us he was the guest speaker there, downtown Johannesburg in those days. He had just come president, at the Carlton Hotel. And Walter was notoriously late. I mean, I would go to the house and we're going to an event, and Mama, which is Albertina Sisulu, will be ironing her dress. And I'll say, Mama, the event is starting. The one day we arrived at the event, they'd already packed up and we were the guests. So that's sort of late. And we walked in, notoriously late. We came through the back. In fact, it was the same entrance as we looked there in the back right. And we tiptoed in, and then we came. Mandela was on stage, and he looked up, and he stopped talking. There was the silence. And people were wondering what's going on, and suddenly Mandela said, the person who was responsible for me going to prison is here tonight. Now you must remember South Africa is going through mistrust. And he looked over and he pointed and he says, yes, you, Mr. Sisulu. If I never met you, I would have been a rich businessman or a successful attorney. I meet you and I go to prison. And I think that's the importance, that South Africa was built with a groundswell and other leaders. Mandela was the figurehead, where Sisulu was the kingmaker. But I always had dreams. We all have dreams. My dream was to build a school. Why did I have that dream? Because myself, I'm special needs in education. Education did not come easy to me. I started school in 1971. After my first year of schooling, I couldn't read or write. I was put into the first special needs school in Joburg for dyslexia, and I was ADHD as well, and you can see me moving around. I must move all the time. And at the same time, I was put into a psychiatric children's hospital, as they did not know what was wrong with me with ADHD as an outpatient. I was always a child that wanted to succeed. I knew I was different, but I knew one thing I had to do was build a school. I wanted to help other children. But I wanted to do things differently. I wanted to do it through social cohesion. I wanted to bring by bringing different communities together, to work together, to build a new South Africa. And being in the department today, this week, in the invitation, learning what you do, people need to work together. the haves, those who have, different religious groups, different race groups. We need to work together to make a difference in our world. South Africa is going through turmoil. People were scared. We're going through this transformation. And leading up to 1994 and the negotiations, where was this country going? How were we going to get there? There was violence in our townships, spawned on by what we call the third force. People who wanted South Africa to fail. And in April 1993, there was the assassination by white supremacists of a chap named Chris Hani. Chris Hani was the head of the armed wing of the African National Congress called Inkonto Sizwe. And he is also the head of the Communist Party. He is a brilliant, brilliant man. And he was working to bring people together. No, he was shot dead by white supremacists. That brought our country to the brink of civil war. It was 9 days like an earthquake had come through us. Was South Africa going to get out of this? I was young. I don't know. Sorry. Oh, there we go. I was young and a little bit naive as well. I was learning. I couldn't go to university. I've never been able to go to university. I had to learn on my feet, which I still do today. The next thing, I was in our offices, and the fax machine starts. And out the fax machine, you can see that fax. I was asked to be one of the speakers on the same speaker list as Nelson Mandela at Soccer City, what was known in that days for the funeral of Chris Hani. When we went to, I drove there. I had a colleague I was working with at the World Bank education desk. I was a whitey. There was anger. There was hatred. I had no fear. I was on my mission to make a difference. In fact, Dr. Zingai Butambuka, who I'm still friendly today from the World Bank, he was in the guerrilla movement in Zimbabwe, in Mozambique. He said he's never been so fearful when we drove there. I had no fear. The sea of people parted, the roads were full of people with anger, toying. And we went into the stadium, and that was a lesson. Because when Nelson Mandela got up to speak, he could have spoken about hatred. He could have spoken about revenge. He did not do that. He talked about, yes, about one of Wallace and his co-accused who murdered Chris Hani. But he also spoke about a young Afrikaans woman, the neighbor, who helped the police catch them. And I think that's another important lesson. That also brought about the quick process for South Africa for its transformation to democracy. When Chris Hani was assassinated, not de Klerk, the president of the country, came onto national television. It was Nelson Mandela. It was Nelson Mandela. And there was still no anger at that stadium, where it could have blown over completely, because when we were sitting there, and I was waiting to be called up to say my few words, we started hearing and the gunshots outside, where the security police clashed with innocent protesters. Before we knew it, it felt like a whirlwind was coming through the turnstiles into the stadium. And around the stands, people got up and they started to toi-toi. I don't know if you all know what toi-toi is, but if you got 70,000 people toi-toying on a stand, that started shaking. The stadium started shaking. I remember President Ramaphosa, who was then Secretary General, getting up and asking comrades, please keep calm, because the engineers have said the stadium will collapse. That was the first time I was nervous. So they had to cut the speakers then, because they had to turn the field into a medical evacuation. And that violence spread to parts of the country, but it was through the stalwart leadership of Nelson Mandela and his comrades that brought calm to the country. In August 1993, the elections now and through our democratic change are coming fast. And I was talking to Walter about how are we going to let the world know altogether, and key makers, about apartheid, the lifting of sanctions, specifically the American content where you've got city and state sanctions, and it takes time for federal sanctions to develop. There was no social media. There's no smartphones. So I said, why don't we produce a video that we could gift after Mandela goes to the United Nations? And he thought it was a good idea. So I went to go see Nelson Mandela. We went to talk about it. I had met Nelson Mandela, before that as well a few times. In fact, he used to say to me on the 10th floor, "You're always hanging around here," he used to say. "You're always hanging around here." But I know why, because you're Walter's friend. And Mandela thought it was a great idea. And we produced a video called No Easy Walk to Freedom. I was sitting in a safe house in Houghton, one of the Joburg leafy suburbs. This was in September now, 1993. There was Mandela on a chair like you sitting, with the auto cue, and they're filming for the lifting of sanctions. And the auto cue's going. And he stops. And he looks across at a chap named Carl Niehaus, who was a spokesperson at the time of the African National Congress. And he says, "Carl, I can't say this. I'm going to be calling for the lifting of sanctions, lifting save for arms and oil. We haven't made a decision yet as the ANC if we're going to do that." And time was coming closer when they're going to go to the United Nations. Cole looked at him and he said, "Madiba, you can trust James." Mandela finished doing the video, and I'd just like to play one part of that.
The Transitional Executive Council, as well as its sub-councils, have now been installed. A date of election has now been set, and we now call upon the international community to lift sanctions, with the exception of the embargo, the oil and arms embargo. But all other sanctions, trade sanctions and financial sanctions, we now call upon the world to lift them and to start trading with South Africa.
That was history before it happened. I had history in my hand. I was given the safeguard of history. I could have put it in a video machine. And I was entrusted with history. I look back and think, I was part of history before it happened. At that time, I was doing a lot of work with the National Peace Secretariat. It was made up of the different political parties, civil organizations, etc. Because we were going through such turmoil in the country. And we were on the brink. We were very much on the brink. The world cameras were there. I'm not sure if they're looking that the transformation goes smoothly or they wanted to see a civil war. But I believed, and I strongly still today believe, that peace and education go hand in hand. So I was working with the National Peace Secretariat, and we developed what we call the Golden Doves of Peace Awards. This was an award that we're going to award the top 10 peacemakers in South Africa. This was decided before the elections of the National Peace Secretariat. The National Peace Secretariat was going to choose those 10 peacemakers. And then they chose people who was going to hand out the awards to the different people. I was given the honor to give Nelson Mandela the Peace Award for South Africa. It was amazing to be able to be there, to walk into the room with Mandela, where it was within 4 weeks or so of him coming president. And I saw the mistrust still in the country because this was taking place at Santon Sun, which is a hotel in the area called Santon, very upmarket hotel. And when I went to go meet Mandela, we were going up the escalators and you could see a lot of people were just looking. But then there were American contingent, and suddenly you saw all the flash cameras going. They could not believe the South Africans opposite to that. It was a very, very difficult time in the country's history. But there was a time to give back. And this time the tables turned. We had the inauguration, we'd had the Peace Awards. Nelson Mandela was going to help us at Education Africa. Nelson Mandela's inauguration medallion, struck at the South African Mint, was in aid of Education Africa. And you'll see in the one picture over there, I think will be on your left, myself with my hero and friend Tata Sisulu with Mandela. This was all, you must remember, while he was president and prior to his president. After his presidency, he retired and he had then the Children's Fund and the Nelson Mandela Foundation. There was no conversation going on in education in the country. We had different systems. And I believe that we had to start talking. We had to bring government together. We had to bring civil society together. We had to bring business together. We needed a conversation. And with the support of President Mandela and the 9 premiers of South Africa, we started the Presidential and Premier Education Awards, honoring the unsung heroes in education. These awards took place on the presidential estate. There were up to 1,500 people silver service. And I used to walk in with Mandela and go sit with him. And people used to look. But I was never looking for recognition, which only came years later, which I didn't even think about. I'd tell my stories. But this slide always I look at, and I still look at today. It's not that I'm standing with President Mandela, but you'll see a person between myself and next to myself on your left, a chap named of Rory Steyn. He was the head of the Mandela Security Decal. He was also the head of the previous president, which was the apartheid president, de Klerk. And it always reminds me of the South African Rugby World Cup, because there was so much security when I was working with Mandela around him, and the unease and what had to be done. But at the Rugby World Cup, when he donned the Springbok jersey, a symbol of apartheid, the Springbok, sports apartheid, you could feel the change in South Africa. Just that bit, just by having empathy and tolerance and showing support of social cohesion to others, I think it changed the trajectory of South Africa forever. So we had to join hands for education. We had come out of apartheid education legacy, which included Bantu education, which didn't allow for a black person to learn maths or science. And the challenges of those and things that we have still today, and mistakes that have been made, we've still got a difficult future in education. But I still believe, as we build our democracy, as we build our education system, it's going to have to be based on peace, bringing together tolerance and empathy, because without those two, you can't have peace. You can't have peace in the world. You can't have peace in your communities. You can't even have peace at home without those two. But now it was time to get down and get dirty and start delivering education programs. And Adam spoke about our school in Orange Farm, Masabambani College. That school was built because I met someone from the city of Vienna. I'm not going to go into that whole story. But it was Tata Sisulu who said, James, don't build the school in Soweto. Build the school at Orange Farm. There's nothing there. And we started building our school, which Adam's given you some history towards, and I can talk about it later. But it wasn't enough just to build a school. We needed to build a number of education programs. And the one I will talk about now, you would have seen those learners in uniform, is the South African Model United Nations. Different to Model UNs around the world, but the only Model UN that twinned and brought together resourced and under-resourced children in a positive way of social cohesion. So the kids that have no resources in these poor schools participated at an equal level with disadvantaged kids. Our Model UN was national, so you went through your 9 provincial workshops, your provincial conferences, and we went on to debates in the US and visit the United Nations. Every single Model UN that we entered we came away with top honors in the small delegation in the world against the best schools. Why? You're giving opportunity. You're allowing people's dreams. People you need to help fulfill dreams. Sometimes you can't do that on their own. Life was great. We had our school, we had our programs going, we were writing books, we were bringing people together. Life couldn't have been better. I was living my dream. But as in the world, sometimes things don't go your way. And sometimes they don't go your way not because of you, but could be because of your government. It could be something to do with your community. It could be around greed and corruption. And corruption is a cancer that has been tearing South Africa apart. But something that we will get over as South Africans because we're strong. And I always say I'm a radical optimist. Then came the avalanche. The international financial institution tried to do a hostile takeover of our little charity. Can you imagine one of the biggest financial institutions in the world doing a hostile takeover of a charity? The destruction it caused in so many lives. Today, I have certain health issues. We've got people in our office who were in our offices who could not work any further from the intimidation. And it's all documented in a letter from Lord Peter Hayne. Lord Peter Hayne's family went into exile in the 60s to the UK. When he grew up, the white South African population knew him as Hayne the Pain, because South Africans love sport, and I'm no different to you guys. But he led the sports boycotts, and he stopped trading or allowing us to trade in sport. He was a hero to a lot of South Africans. Lord Peter Hayne, when the new South Africa came about, he was so excited as he played a part in what he had done. But now it was time for him to carry on doing his parliamentary work in the UK. And then he saw the corruption. And he used his parliamentary privilege to expose corruption in South Africa. And what do we need in a strong democracy? Freedom of media. We need freedom of media. The ANC fought for media, freedom of media. And Lord Peter Hayne wrote one of his open letters of what happened at Education Africa. It's a 5-page letter, and it talks about the incredible intimidation that we went through. The organization, global organization outside of South Africa, they did pay damages in the millions of Canadian dollars. And you'll hear further about that, and I'll go deeper into that if you read my book, which will come out next year. But we're left out in the cold. And that's what's going to happen to all of you, especially the young people in the room. Life's not smooth. And you're working in peace and conflict. You're going to be left out in the cold. It's how do you get up through that? Do you have the faith? Are you prepared to go in and make a difference. I was speaking to Jason about Ukraine, where his family originates from, and how difficult it is. Could you imagine being a Ukrainian and you're living a peaceful life, and you have these projectiles and someone who wants to wipe you out as they were living 1,000 years ago? They're standing up, and the world's standing up. And that's what we've got to do. No different to what Education Africa and our team did. We stood up. It was David versus Goliath, and we stood up against them. But then there's always reconstruction, and you need to rebuild. And we had to rebuild a shattered organization, an organization that had gone from a 22 million annual income down to 2 million. We were so disparaged. Were we ever going to survive? Yes, we were going to fight for what was right. And we have survived. And we have grown. We've used opportunities to say that we started our marimba program. From having one marimba before this, hub before this, today Education has 34, with over 2,000 kids in the program on it during the week, during school term. And we believe so much in inclusivity because education and music can bring people together. So we trained the first fully deaf marimba band in the world from a disadvantaged community. Last year we trained a visually impaired marimba band. We have physically disabled children marimba bands who are stuck in a wheelchair or don't have all their limbs, but they can produce music. They can play on the same stage as the able children through our Sounds of Celebration program. They can play together and compete against able children in our Marimba Festival, one of the biggest of its kind in the world. And I'm proud to say that CNN International in South Africa have done 3 documentaries on our marimba program. Our school in Orange Farm, it has hampered funding for the bricks and mortar donors that we lost. But we've rebuilt the school, and the results are astronomical. And last year, Adam, we got 59 distinctions, and this year we aim for more. We're writing our matrics. And we're giving those children opportunity. So however bad someone what they want to do to us, we've developed and grown. Our Model UN program, that's the only one that we've had to put on ice. But what we've done with our early childhood development, from that time where we just had a skills program, today at Education Africa, we have 8 training centers. We train over 200 student teachers. It's all free. Each of those teachers will impact these 2,250 children in their teaching life cycle, directly and indirectly. And that's just over a 2-year period. And we're growing that because South Africa, we need to take childhood development seriously. It has not been taken seriously. It's been in the National Development Plan for 25 years to move it to basic education. It's from social services. And we need education. We need to educate our children, because if we don't educate our children, we're going to have conflict. And if you don't get a child in their first 6 years in their foundation phase, it's another lost generation. It's another generation that's going to get so angry a generation that's not going to care about a free market economy because they're going to be left out. So we've got to do and build preschools. And I'll just give you a quick idea that in South Africa we have a shortage of around 200,000 preschool teachers qualified. We have a shortage of infrastructure of preschools of 125,000 by 2030. In short, if you go into looking at our matric results that Adam was talking about, is that government says that we've got an 83% pass rate. That is not true. That is not true. Because where in the world do you need to know only 70% of your work to pass? So if you know 30% of your work, you get a matriculation certificate. When I was at school, I got a school leaving certificate to show that I followed through and finished school. I didn't get a matriculation certificate, I never have. I also like to give an example that if you look at last year's matrics, which are grade 12s, from when they entered, when you do your subject choices in grade 10, 275,000 children have been pushed out of the system. $275,000, why aren't they in that statistic? Why don't they tell you that our universities are bursting at the seams for children or young people who want to do degrees in human resources? We need engineers, we need doctors, we need accountants. And for people to follow those courses, they need a good matric. And I always say the minimum is most probably 60%. You want higher than that if you want to get into economic subjects, medicine, engineering. South Africa produces about 30,000 children who get English, maths, and science at that level, which includes the white population. So we've got challenges ahead. Governments just cut the Category 1 schools subsidies. We're a Category 1 school. That means that the poorest schools and most high-performing schools in black communities face closure. There's someone sitting in their office ticking a pen, ticking boxes. So that's another fight that we're going to have to fight for our children and for our children's education. That's not a right as constituted in our Constitution. It seems to be a privilege. It can't carry on that way. A black child in South Africa, I always say still today, to get a quality education is about beating the system. That should not be happening. And just when we thought things were bad and we were coming out of things, we had the same challenges as you. COVID struck. Financially, COVID was very difficult for us, but it was the best thing that could ever have happened to Education Africa. It was positive for us, and that's what we like at the organization. We look at the positive side. What can we do? And COVID was a time for us to innovate. Just what we did. Programs that we've got today, which are using ICT platforms to help more and more teachers and students, we have developed in our offices. We've actually got a training studio, so we don't just see this. You see James, you see our trainers. And our trainers are top trainers. And I can go more and more into our projects, but I know time is there. I've met incredible people along the way, but the woman in the top right I talk about Helen Suzman. And I think it's so important for you in this room. She was a white woman under apartheid government. At one stage, she was the only opposition person and only woman in the South African Parliament in the 60s. And she had to deal with 399 white supremacist racists. But she, even though she sat at lunch by herself, she used her parliamentary privilege, just like Lord Peter Hain did, to bring better conditions to Nelson Mandela, Tata Sisulu, and those on Robben Island. She could tell the world about the cruelty of apartheid without being pushed into prison and into detention, because she could use her parliamentary privilege. And I was at a few events with Nelson Mandela, with Helen. So things, if you look at South Africa, was across the colour line that fought for our democracy. And there are a lot of heroes and heroines that made it possible, but you do need a figure, you do need a leader. Life has its detours. It has its detours. But don't ever give up on your dreams. Don't ever, ever give up on your dreams. I have dreams. I still have dreams like I had over 30 years ago. I dream that Education Africa is going to be endowed. And I now make my dreams come true for the next generation. I know that we're going to have to work together as a society to build South Africa and the difficult period we've been through over the last 2 decades. I want to build the biggest childhood development program on the continent, because I believe if we get our children right, we can lay a solid foundation, just like Nelson Mandela did for us. He poured a solid foundation for South Africa to work from and develop from. That's what he left us. The difficulty we have today is that no one took that and built the structure. The bricks were stolen. So we've got a lot of hard work ahead of us. I've had a lot of opportunities. Very special times and moments I've had. And the GIBS, the Gordon Institute of Business Science in South Africa, which is the top business school in Africa, they wrote a business case study on Education Africa using me as a protagonist. That was published by Ivy Business in Canada and is available through Harvard globally. I've won international awards, as Adam was saying. And I'm using that social good and the rewards I've received to grow and better Education Africa, to use that as a platform to make a difference in South Africa and on our continent. And hopefully it rubs off on the world. And I always say, never use hope, James. I always think hope's a negative word, because what is hope? And I just used it. But I have my dreams, and I will deliver on all my dreams. Last year, the Nelson Mandela Foundation honored me at a press lunch at the foundation for my work with Nelson Mandela, which now sits in the archives. And you'll see there that, I think it's, don't know why they said that, but they just said that Mandela next to James. But I was very privileged to be next to Mandela. And they used that and my work with Mandela as part of his 10-year passing. I'm allowed into the archives from time to time, and because if you had worked with him, you're allowed to go there and reflect. It's not open to the public. I was there last week reflecting and getting the strength to come here to the University of Manitoba to share my story. But we need to foster social cohesion, and that comes through opportunities. And Education Africa gives opportunities. I'll give you some examples. Abdullah Faradsha was one of our alumni students from 1999. Abdullah fought hard to beat the system and to get an education. Today, Abdullah heads up strategy at Gibbs. Today, Abdullah heads up the Harvard Business Program for Africa. Today, Abdullah has his own company called The Strategist, and he does global strategy around the world. And today, most of all, Abdullah is chairman of Education Africa. Abdullah is my boss. We grow our own wood at Education Africa, from the training of our trainers to building our future generation. I look at Donga Dingwa, the young lady over there, who 2 years ago, in the middle of Orange Farm, in the middle of COVID, got 9 distinctions, one of the highest in our province. That's around opportunity. And we've got to give opportunity. Because one of our students, she looked at an aeroplane, and she said that could only work out when she walked to school. It can only be the hand of God that could put that in the air. She lost her parents. Both her parents died. She was being pushed out of school because of financial need. Through the Education Africa Walter Sisulu Scholarship Fund, we picked her up. Today, she's an aeronautical engineer in Texas. Give opportunity, we can do anything. I have educated, I've equipped, I've empowered others. And as I've said, it's through tolerance plus empathy that equals peace at all levels of society. And that's why you're all in your department today, because I'm sure you believe in that as well, and that's your goals. That's your DNA. But that comes through enabling someone to educate, equip, and empower. And I challenge all of you to educate, equip, and empower someone so they can come to Moria Institute. Because without that, they're not going to get here. It'll also remain as the privileged few. Let's grow that. Let's make a difference. And if you just change one person's life, what a better world we'll be in if everyone did that. You don't all have to be a James or Education Africa. We change 1,000 lives. But what's also important, we can't do it alone. Mandela couldn't do it alone. You can't do it alone. We can't do it alone. So I'll be running on Sunday for Education Africa, the Hamilton Half Marathon, and there's cards on your desk, on your chairs. So if everyone can scan those and make a little donation and hand those around to others. Because $1 is 13 Rand, and it goes a long way. So let's do it together. I believe a winner is a dreamer who never gives up. So I'm following my dreams. I'm going to make all those dreams I talked about come true. But I can't do that alone. Let's do it together. Thank you. Thank you, Stanley.
I knew that was going to come back to me. Thank you, James, for your soul-stirring and inspiring story. James said much, and I'm sure something would have triggered in you to ask a few questions. So I'll give you the technical stuff first and then share and ask a question of you. There will be a mic right in the middle of the room, a microphone. You could head out there and ask a question. Jason will have another microphone in his hand, and I'll have one in this corner. And so if you need to ask, just raise your hand, we'll run to you. I was struck personally, among all the things he shared, I was struck by a slide that you put up where Nelson Mandela was honoring Walter. And a comment he made there that I read was that he made me realize my real vocation was to be a servant of the people. And I think what we see today is that, James, you are a servant of your dream. He serves his inspiration. He serves all that is good for peace and education. And so my question, and I'll start that off and then I'll turn it off to you, is, James, in all this noise and of turmoil and chaos, how do you continue to sustain your belief and your dream?
Well, Stan, it's sort of a good one and a hard one, but I'll look at it as a global perspective. I am a dreamer, I am a believer. I believe that I can do it. I can believe that I can change lives, but I also don't believe I can do it by myself, as I said. But I do see the greater good in people. And I see the greater good in the world. And I look a lot through, neutralize a lot of things in my life. So now you talk about turmoil, and I'm happy to, and brave enough to say it. People often say to me, James is a Jew. Which side are you on? I get that nonstop. In South Africa as well. I'm on the side of peace. Empathy and tolerance creates peace, and that's whose side I am. And that's why I believe in a future, I believe in a world. And if we stop being polarized, let's work together to make a world. Because there's no different from any child in the world. May they come from parts of the Middle East, or from Asia, or from our own continent that's often ignored. There's more atrocities and more children are dying than any continent in the world. And without education, we're not going to be able to do anything. And just so you know as well, I always say when I go to talks in South Africa and I'm speaking to our students, you can ask me any question. If it's very technical, I might say, well, I'll speak to the expert next to me. So Stan, you seem to be the expert next to me.
Thank you.
James, thank you very much for the presentation. My question is, in today's society, we often see the poverty is coming with the lack of education in the remote places. And it's hard to establish schools in these remote places. That's why poverty is almost coming as part of it. With the new technology and online education, how do you see the opportunity here? Does that already having a huge impact in Africa?
Well, I'm going to talk about that from the educational perspective, which I've just touched on in our talk. Technology, we need to embrace. I think technology is going to make a huge difference. So during COVID, we were ignited to use more and more technology. So where our marimba program should have shut down because it was closed by government for 18 months, we didn't sit there. We used that time to innovate. So we had 30, I think it was 28 or 30 marimba teachers that we brought online through funding through the Swiss Foundation. And we gave them all tablets, we gave them Casio keyboards, we gave them data. Kept them engaged, and that's what technology can do. Through our early child development program, again, we used what we learned, and we went out, because what happened after 3 days or that of COVID, South Africa had one of the hardest lockdowns in the world. You weren't allowed out your house to go for a walk. You weren't even allowed to take your dog for a walk. So when we were communicating with our student teachers, after 3 days, what were we hearing? They were starving. Their families were starving. And I'm not going to get into the whole thing from our government side. But we use that as an opportunity. We got essential worker permits, and we use those to deliver food. And inside the food parcels, we put their workbooks. We put data. We put exercise books that they can complete their work, which we swapped out every month. And we did the online teaching through their mobile phones. They didn't have high memory, so it could just be the classwork. We're using that now, and what we've learned, to expand our programs and create better teachers. Today we have 40 preschools, hubs at Education Africa, where we do blended training and teaching into rural. We're moving that up to funding, depending on the next few years, to have 500 preschools plus. And what you talk about to go more rural, we're using what we've learned to create a social franchise, to empower others in other communities in other parts of the continent to use technology and embrace as a form of support to educate our children.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Aaron Levere. I'm a teacher from the North End here in Winnipeg. I got permission to come here today to hear from you, because as teachers in the North End, we're always wondering how to make this work. It feels like we're fighting a losing battle. It feels like we're trying to make a coat for our kids out of not enough fabric. And it's interesting to me that you mentioned going to the Human Rights Museum and noticing a connection between what you learned about residential schools and the history in Canada and apartheid in South Africa. Just as a footnote, throughout the early 1900s, people from South Africa would come to Canada and learn about reserves here and residential schools here and help build that into the architecture of apartheid in South Africa. So it has a direct connection to that history. I'm wondering, as a teacher here, what all the teachers in those neighborhoods are wondering is, what makes your school a success? And is it possible through public funding, or is it through the donors you have to Education Africa that makes that successful? What are the characteristics of your school that make them have the graduation matriculation rates that you're talking about, or the qualification for university that you're talking about? If you could tell us more, we'd love to know. Thank you.
One word: social cohesion. Social cohesion. Because our school partner is St. John's College, one of the top Ivy schools in Johannesburg. And they're part of that ownership when we built the school. They're still part of it today. They're very instrumental in helping us and our team of teachers to get the best results in these communities. I believe that South Africa could have been in a very different place if our government believed in that in education. So one of the things I was working with was to say, how do we get 1,000 schools twinned to 5,000 schools and share? And that was in 1999. It's covered in my book. And use social cohesion to transform education. Then Minister of Education, Kader Asmal, stopped that. It was centralized. So we have great difficulties because South Africa has the expertise. But government being quite socialist, keep things in. And I'm hoping now through our government of national unity that we'll be able to work together a lot easier. And the mistrust go again that was built up by Mandela and we lost over the last decade and a half. To work across the colour lines and across the colour lines also including of all colours who have the expertise to build our country and to build our education system. But as I was saying, with the results that we've got a real tough road ahead. And I think South Africa is still going to have a number of lost generations, and Africa. But those who come home to help us, together we are stronger, together we can make real change happen. Let's do that together. So the answer is social cohesion. Go down to the school down the road, and maybe they can learn from you or you can learn from them.
Hi, James. Should we dance? No. Am I allowed to ask a hard question?
Stan?
Stan, can I ask a hard question? Okay. We've all seen founder syndrome. You know, when a non-governmental organization or a country or a foundation gets created, one person, they're awesome, and then that person goes, and then things aren't so awesome. And you mentioned something when you said, and I think I heard you right when you said we grow our own wood. Was that what you said? Yeah. And I'm really wondering, you know, from what we've seen happen in Central Eastern Europe, which is the area of my expertise, you know, and liberation folks then become totalitarian. What we've seen in South Africa with corruption, what we've seen in other places, what we've also seen in foundations. How are you looking in terms of with education in Africa, but also what are you learning from that about not having founder syndrome and about growing your own wood?
Okay. So I'd like to be looked at as just James. People introduce me, it's always James. I'm a normal human being. But yes, we do grow our own wood. And we're going through building our next generation now at Education Africa. International consultancy firm been helping us. By April next year, Education Africa will have a new chief operating officer, a very talented woman, which is going to enable me to go to more Manitobas and tell my story. I'm not going to be running Education Africa forever. I talked about the endowment, and I think that's absolutely crucial, because one thing I will say about the next generation, they're going to want job security. They're not going to want to go through my struggle and my other colleagues' struggle. We have got very, very talented staff. So if I walked out of the university today and the big red bus happened to knock me down, our staff and our team today is strong to continue. I'm moving more and more away from the programs, and very quickly. And part of the strategy that was given to us by the international, they're just doing it on a pro bono basis. If I told you, you'll all know who they are. Part of the strategy is traditional fundraising and research, grant writing, something that's difficult for me to do, and today's helping me a lot, and it's going to help Education Africa a lot, is James, go out and tell your story in your personal capacity. Because that's where the funding will come from. There'll be people in the room who want to fund James's story, because they said people don't fund charities. So then I'm hoping very soon that I'll be doing more of these, and our team back home will be running Education Africa. So I do believe that our team is well qualified. 3 of our senior staff have master's degrees. So one thing I've always been able to do is employ people a lot cleverer and more able than me. We train our trainers from ground up. In fact, our most successful programs have those who we have trained, not those who we've brought from the outside. So we're growing our own wood, not from tiny acorns. We're growing a long, well-structured organization, even through the turmoil that we've been through.
That's very short. James, we've had a chance to chat over the last couple of days, and I just want to follow up a little bit on the teacher's question a little more. In terms of understanding where your students come from, whether it's into the marimba programs or into the teacher college, they do come from largely from Orange Farm, as I understand it, not a particularly, an extremely not well-off part of the world. One of the struggles, I think, I know some of the North End schools, it's that families are not really there to support the kids. That's a big problem. There's a real absence there, and so for the teachers, they're often swimming alone. I'm wondering about how you deal with that in the South African context, how that works in schools, the fact that maybe parents are sometimes absent. Is that an experience that your schools and your students face? And if so, how does that work at a ground level in schools to try and deal with that? And when you describe and define social cohesion as sort of teachers working together and collaborating and that kind of interaction, but to what extent is that absent, the parents and the family support, and how do you deal with that? Just a little more detail.
It's a difficult one, but first of all, we've got to understand that we only have one bricks and mortar school. The impact that we get through the provinces and to more people is through programs. So I always say to build a structure, it's a lot more money to run that structure. All our programs are free, save for our school of bricks and mortar, which government subsidizes, and the parents have to pay a stipend towards that. Poverty in the Western world is very different to poverty in Africa. If you look at our teachers who we train in, getting a national qualification certificate, not an Education Africa certificate, have to be supported by their communities. Our government doesn't support them. Like some of the schools, if they get registered, they'll give you 17 Rand a day per child. That is what, $1.20? How do you survive? Till such time as government starts to pay the preschool teachers, there's no career path. Because a qualified teacher in a peri-urban or rural area in South Africa is earning well below the minimum wage. So it'll be better to be a hoer of wood and cut down our tree than to be a teacher in South Africa as a preschool. We've got 4 systems of education in South Africa. You've got the state system, which is free schooling. You're not going to get education there. That's where the majority of our children are. I think the last time I looked was a few years ago. Of the 13 million kids at school, 9.5 million of them on a subsidy of 1 meal a day. That's a stain on our society. So you can see the challenge are different. Then we have what we call our Model C schools, and this is where payment starts. They're the old white schools, which government subsidizes, but the communities can put in extra funding to get more teachers and build on those facilities. Then you have the independent schools, which we are independent subsidized school. So if you're category 1 school, you get no subsidy from government, even though you're paying taxes. And down to category, okay, that's a category 4 school, sorry, and down to category 1 school, which we are, which you do get a subsidy, which has been cut. So it's going to go more and more difficult. And because government has failed in the delivery of education, parents are willing to pay. So we've got private schools, so that is for-profit schools. So the private sector stepped in to build schools and to deliver education, but that comes at a price. So the filter through into these schools are coming from the government sector a lot of the times. So the government sector schools, which the majority of children are actually getting worse and worse. So I hope that helps by doing it in a way of challenges. But it's really today, as I said earlier, getting an education in South Africa for a black child is beating the system. And I don't think we can compare what's happening in the Western world to the developing world and what's happening in our own country in education. It's so far apart.
I believe that education in Africa will continue to sustain itself. And I believe that it will also overcome this founder syndrome from 2 things I heard you say today, James. It will survive that founder syndrome because of the belief in mentorship. James celebrated the mentorship of Walter. And his program of empowering and educating and equipping is grounded in mentoring others. And I thank you for that message. What a joy it would be for us as educators in this organization, an institution called the University of Manitoba, to be mentors to our students, to be mentors to all that is around us. And number 2, I think your organization and Education Africa will survive beautifully because you come not just to talk about yourself, but you come to celebrate the successes of others. And I thank you for that. And let's give him another round of applause. So before we close for the afternoon, and I do want to thank you all for coming, and I also want to reiterate a thanks to Jason for the heavy lifting he's done for this event. We're going to invite 2 students from the Peace and Conflict Studies here at the University of Manitoba at St. Paul's College, a PhD student and a master's student. Casey Dong, a PhD student with Peace and Studies, and Diwan Aule, a master's student at Peace and Justice, to come up and offer your appreciation and thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Cassie. I'm a PhD student in Peace and Conflict Study who's really passionate about the art and education for peace building. And so recently, Jason reached out to me and said, hey, we have really amazing, distinguished speakers who work his own about education for peace building. So I think you may be really interested in coming to this lecture and maybe give him, present the student here in Peace and Conflict Study program and give him thank you. And I said, yes, of course. And I'm really, really glad that I agreed to that invitation and come here today. James, your story really directly speaks to the role and power of education and social cohesion in peace building. And I was really touched by when you mentioned Abdullah, an alumni who received an education education, thanks to Education Africa, and came back and give back to the community. And I think that's just a beautiful example of long-term peace building, of how we can build a sustainable infrastructure for peace. And so thank you so much for coming here and spending your time. And I think your lecture really inspires and motivates us here who are students, teachers, practitioners, peace builders, in building peace in our own communities, in our own capacity, and thinking critically about the role of education and social cohesion in sustainable peace building. So thank you.
Thank you.
And now I will give it to Diwan, our master student in Peace and Conflict Study, who presents a special gift from the Canadian Museum of Human Rights.
Oh, wow.
Do you want to see?
Yeah.
So this is for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there a pic?
Is it picture?
Okay, there's the picture. Thank you. Well, this was the blanket that I saw when I was doing the tour, and we had a Rwanda survivor, Francois, taking us on. We met her up there, and she started explaining the blanket. And when she talked about the residential schools, as I said earlier, and she said some of the children didn't go home after. I stopped her to see if I heard right. And a lot of our children in South Africa, through migrant labor, through apartheid, families have been destructed completely. So we've got a long build ahead. And as you had your TRC, we had our TRC, and we've got to heal together, but give back and build together.
Thank you. Thank you, James, and thank you again for coming, and let's look forward to continue to piecing together, no pun intended, piecing together the pieces that have been separated. Thank you, James. Thank you all.
Thank you.